Happy to have the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Andrew Scheer, joining us. Mr. Scheer, thanks for taking some time for CTV today.
Thank you very much.
Your thoughts on extending this program? What do you make of it?
Well, we support ensuring that people who have been affected by this pandemic through no fault of their own are able to receive benefits. We fought hard to get the wage subsidy lifted from 10% to 75%, so we're pleased by that. We've been pointing out gaps in this program for weeks now. We've been frustrated that it's taken so long to make some of these changes and to make, and there's still many changes left to be made. So we're concerned that the government is still letting so many people down with gaps in their programs, but we will continue to support programs that keep people working and keep small businesses, small, medium-sized businesses open.
Why do you think it is that some Canadian businesses, Mr. Scheer, have chosen not to take part in the program, at least thus far?
Well, we are concerned by that, and we are very aware of some barriers to access. There are a number of very technical, bureaucratic clauses in the program that prevented a lot of companies from being able to access it. For example, I have an example in my own riding where one business bought a second business, and both separately would have qualified for the wage subsidy, but because they were lumped together after the purchase, artificially didn't qualify. So there's a lot of people who are at risk of losing their jobs there. Hopefully the government will make changes to fill in those gaps so that people don't fall through the cracks. And that's what we're going to do. As the opposition, we've been pointing out very specific changes that are required to make sure that people aren't let down by these programs.
I'm also curious what you think of the so-called COVID-19 economic hangover here and word that our debt could hit $1 trillion because of all of this spending. How concerned are you about, us going massively into the red?
Well, I'm very concerned, but my concern stems from what a weakened position Justin Trudeau left this country heading into this pandemic. It's not like we entered into this virus with a robust balance sheet. Mr. Trudeau ran multiple deficits of multi-billion dollars for years while times were good. And he sloughed it off. He said, oh, don't worry, we'll always have the money to pay for these things. Well, now that we've had a crisis hit, we're left much weakened, in a much more weakened state to deal with it. I'm very concerned about the overall size of the debt. I'm also concerned about how the government's managing in the short term, printing money at the Bank of Canada. That has long-term, very negative consequences that we have to be very, very concerned about. So we support getting benefits out the door very quickly to those who need it in a timely fashion, but we're going to have to start to have a conversation on how to kickstart the economy to get out of this downturn as quickly as possible.
You mentioned to those who need it, so I'm also wondering what you make about the idea of folks taking advantage of some of these programs, Mr. Scheer, when they actually don't need it or they don't qualify. In other words, the issue of fraud. How concerned should we be?
Well, we should be very concerned. We're hearing reports from across the country of people who, criminals receiving the CRB, people who have made fraudulent claims in the past. Very concerned that the federal government seems to have told public servants to ignore these types of things. When you're talking about, say, 100,000 or 200,000 fraudulent claims, times $2,000 times 2 or 3 months, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, which could be used to help more people get through this downturn, but instead is going to people who don't qualify or don't deserve it. We don't believe that it's impossible for the government to get money out the door quickly, but to also make sure that it's going to people who deserve it. And this government is telling us that they're just incapable of putting safeguards in these programs to ensure that it's not being abused. That's unacceptable.
The other issue I want to ask you about is getting Parliament back together face to face, and your read on whether this whole virtual situation, which of course has had technical issues and obviously not the same thing as everybody being there in the House of Commons. What's your read?
Well, as more and more provinces start to lift restrictions, in Ontario, people are able to go to parks and campsites and go to golf courses. We believe, of course, that Parliament should be sitting. We're not proposing all 338 people come into one chamber. We're proposing a similar plan to what we presented a few weeks ago, where a small number from every caucus could represent their parties. We could provide the oversight and accountability that we know ends up with better results for Canadians. When the opposition parties do their job, when we go through their legislation, go through their programs, identifying the gaps and the weaknesses, we get better products for Canadians. We think it's essential that Parliament return to some kind of a normal sitting on May 25th with a reduced roster of MPs.
Something else you just mentioned that sort of strikes me, and I'm just curious to get your take on it. You know, I mean, since this began, we have seen Justin Trudeau come out every day almost and speaking from Rideau Cottage to try and address different issues to Canadians. Do you worry at all, as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, that your voice and even the other opposition voices have been sidelined in all of this, simply in terms of, you know, it's a crisis and Canadians are looking for leadership and they want to know that they're safe and they're being taken care of, but that perhaps there's an erosion of, you know, the sort of conversation that goes on, whether it's Liberal, Conservative, Bloc, NDP, Green, whatever it might be?
Well, I think Canadians want to have confidence that their institutions are still functioning. It's alarming when governments try to eliminate the role of elected representatives. We saw what the Liberals tried to do. Their very first piece of legislation during this crisis is very telling. Their very first piece of legislation was to grab unprecedented powers and eliminate the role of the opposition in Parliament. I think that was tremendously upsetting to Canadians. And I believe that, you know, Justin Trudeau needs to be held accountable in the House of Commons. It's what our Constitution says. It's what our democratic institutions were designed around. That needs to resume. He's spending billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. He's making other unrelated policy announcements as it relates to firearms, for example, at the same time. And the House of Commons has no ability right now, really, to hold him to account. I believe Mr. Trudeau prefers being able to make daily announcements without that kind of scrutiny, but I don't think it's serving our democratic institutions well, and I don't believe Canadians want to see this continue.
Andrew Scheer is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. It's always great to get you on CTV News, Mr. Scheer, and thank you for doing this today on this Friday. Happy long weekend ahead to you and your family.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
You as well.